Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and today I'm here with Felicia Hogan, and we have so many topics that we could talk about. Because we both, came out of Christianity, and our stories may be slightly different, but overall, there's many of the same things we noticed. Certain logical problems with the idea of sin, human responsibility, heaven and hell, and sacrificial atonement, the morality of God, all of these things. And so, it doesn't make too much difference as far as, I could start telling my story, or Felicia could tell her story. What would you like to do, Felicia?
Well, since you've complained that I haven't been on enough, I'll go ahead and give it a go, shall I?
Yes, because I'm really curious of, your story more.
Well, I think you've been following me on YouTube, so you're probably pretty much caught up.
Well, yeah, sort of. Although you could, yeah, obviously in your videos you can't cover up, years of history. You can't go in detail, but I was actually more curious about the ways in which Christianity fell apart for you once you understood that we don't have the control over our brains or the prior causes to be responsible for our thoughts, intentions, desires, all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't think I've actually delved into that on YouTube before, so I guess this would be as good a time of it as any.
Yes.
So for anybody who has not been following me on YouTube and is unfamiliar with my story, I'll give a little bit of background before we jump into that. I was raised a fundamentalist Christian by two fundamentalist Christian parents in a heavily in the Bible Belt in a Christian school, and I went to a Christian church, and I had Christian friends, and it was essentially just a bubble. And then I went off to college in a different state, Christian college, by the way. So I wasn't stepping
Yeah.
too far out there,
Yeah, I think we're starting to see the pattern here.
right? um, and it was the end of my first year there, and I took a social psychology class for my pre-law major, just because I thought it would be interesting, and I had to get psychology credit, so why not? And we were talking about all the different things that affect people's behaviors. And specifically, there was a study or an experiment where they put an electrode in a bull's brain and then deliberately, aggravated him, made him angry. And then just when he was about to charge or mid charge, set they sent an electric impulse through his brain and it turned off the rage.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting because the way I grew up, the mind wasn't the brain. The mind was the soul, the spirit, the immaterial part that's not even part of your body. That's your mind and emotions. That's what I was taught.
Now that you mention it, that I don't know if I was necessarily taught that, but that was definitely the impression that I got.
Yes, that's sort of the impression because basically the way they teach it is that, well, you can go to heaven or hell and be outside of your body and have a spirit or soul, but that you still have emotions and that you're still the same person. And I'm like, well, if the person you are has nothing to do with your physical body, then what's the body for? you know?
Just to house our quote unquote spirit, I guess.
Yeah, never. I always wanted to leave it and just be a ghost like Jacob Marley floating around and haunting people, something like that.
That area of the brain, the part of the brain that houses sort of our consciousness and how our thoughts develop and our emotions and all that's processed, that's a relatively new development in science, biology, and psychology.
Yes, and it takes time before the rest of the world, will listen to new evidence that they discover.
Especially when it's this dangerous to their, beliefs. And I think the US is 78% Christian.
Yeah.
Although I think that was before the recent check by Pew that said that the it was the rise of the nuns. the
Yeah.
non-religious.
Yeah, I've been reading articles recently that's saying, it's rising in recent years, and I've been trying to figure out what the cause for this, increase in secularism, non-Christianness and all that.
I think there's an increase in compassion,
Yeah, I mean, that could be it
empathy.
because the way I look at it, so many people, they grow up in these Christian homes where they're awfully abused and judged, and especially if there's anything different about them, whether it's autism or bipolar or a different sexual orientation than Christians allow, any of those things, well, then they're treated really badly. So I think what happens is some of them they become sort of like I did, where I just kind of am like, oh, I want to rid the planet of religion. That's kind of how I feel.
Oh, you swung that hard, huh?
Yeah, that's kind of how I swung, and then I'm like, a lot of people die because of false religious beliefs that was shoved into their little heads as children, and they can't get out of it even as adults, and I consider religion a form of child abuse.
I don't think I'd go so far to say it's child abuse because I'm trying really hard to find a balance, between, allowing people the freedom to make mistakes and to believe as they wish and to think as they wish and do as they wish, but not impeding on the rights of others, and telling people how to raise their kids just becomes a really tricky thing.
Well, you have a point there, Felicia, because obviously it's not practical to tell parents, what they have to teach their kids. I get that. And it's sort of like, I'm actually in favor of parents being allowed to homeschool their children, and I was homeschooled. And that's kind of part of my story. But what's interesting is that there's a lot of people who want to ban homeschooling and that parents should not be allowed to homeschool their children. And I think that's kind of a messed up thing because you know what? There's a lot of benefits that I and other people have received from
Oh
not
yeah.
yeah, from not being in a public school system where you're just bullied constantly.
Okay, first of all, private school system not all that much better. I went to private school my entire life. I've never ever been in a public school. Ever. Not even pre-K. Not
Wow.
even daycare. Never.
Yeah, that's
But
amazing.
I didn't stop having nightmares about high school until last year.
Ooh.
Yeah, I've been out of high school for 4 years and I had nightmares for 3 years after.
Yeah, well, I only for a brief time was in public school, and that was, elementary, I think it was. First, second, third, and fourth grade, back when we lived in Kansas City, Kansas, I went to Lindbergh Elementary, and I got beat up and teased
Mm.
by all sorts of kids, and I did not take it very well, and I became sort of an isolated thing there anyway, with no friends. But when we moved to Lesotho, my mom homeschooled me, and well, she got homeschool materials. There was some science, there was definitely Bible, obviously, and history and math, and I had a talent in math, and my mom wasn't a math person, but she figured I knew how to get the right answers, and I wasn't cheating. But yeah, I think homeschooling can be a good thing when you consider the state of the public and private schools, because I suppose it could be argued that the public and private schools, with all the bad influences there, could be more child abuse than anything that certain kids would encounter being raised and taught by their parents.
Well, that also depends on the parents. There are a lot of parents that simply are not equipped to be able to homeschool their kids.
Yes,
And
definitely.
both parents are having to work two jobs to provide because our minimum wage sucks and there's not enough jobs, and
Yeah,
they can't be there for their kids.
yeah,
And
it's
some
true.
parents aren't going to be good teachers. Some parents are simply irresponsible. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
there's no good way to make it work for everybody. There's just
well,
not.
yeah, it's true. It's not a one size fits all thing because, the parents are different. Their schedules are different. Everything is so different in each person's situation, which is why you've got to have a variety of options for school available, you know? And so I don't think that people should ban homeschooling, just like I don't think that they should ban private schools or public schools necessarily, because I mean that's because no matter how you slice it, it's going to be bad for some people.
Yeah. So I don't know how we got here, but so the electrode in the bull's brain.
Sorry about that. I kind of got off on a little rant that
I really don't know how we managed to get to homeschooling. I really don't.
Neither do I.
Um, and so, anyways, they were able to put an electric pulse through the bull's brain and essentially turn off the rage. And I was wondering, because I wonder about how to apply things, like how why does this matter? I put it into my worldview and see if everything still fits as I assess the truth of something. And I started wondering, is this something that we could use for people who have an issue, have anger management issues?
Wow, that is
Is
an
this
interesting application.
Yeah, like is there a way to fine tune it so that way when there's too much energy in that area of the brain, it'll send that pulse through and stop it?
I mean, if it works for the bull, why not the human brain?
Well, because we also have to make it so that way it does it automatically, and that um it doesn't cancel out the adrenaline fight or flight when that's needed.
Yeah, I mean it's dangerous business messing with that, but I mean in
Yeah.
theory it could work
Yeah,
sometimes.
theoretically, we might eventually get there. And so that's the first time that I really realized, like, wow, there is a section of the brain that makes the emotion anger and rage. And we were just talking about all the different things that influence who you are, your biology. Like I have recurring major depression, and it's not my fault. There's nothing I can do about it. My genetics simply really suck. And the chemicals in my brain are just plain out of whack, and it doesn't allow my brain to function normally.
Yeah, and you know what, Felicia? That's not a rare thing either. A lot
It's
of
really not.
people, yeah, a lot of people have problems with depression or perhaps some sort of rage. And like like I've mentioned before to you that I know a bipolar friend that I have been with her and I've seen her switch. I've seen one minute she's really happy and all hyper and like totally just crazy, man, acting like Pinkie Pie from My Little Pony. The next the next minute she's suicidal and wants to die to go to heaven to end her suffering. And I'm like, oh, oh man, I see it right before my eyes. I see her change from one person into another person. And I know that she doesn't choose that. I know that she's not making that happen.
Yeah.
And it's bizarre because the chemical things are weird because they are invisible because it's going on inside their head, and so the people around don't see the cause, but there's causes in there.
It's probably demon possession.
Well, yeah. Well, what's interesting about that, Felicia, is that a lot of the mental disorders, the Christians try to cast it out of them. They try to pray it out of them, and there's a lot of people who have just been damaged far worse because instead of getting treatment from people who know how to help them in some sort of more scientific medication or some other therapy way, they're just having people, pray to invisible people and getting no results. And that's one. I guess you could say that's just one of the sad things about religion too. That bothered me.
Yeah, actually, there were some people at my school who didn't think depression was a real thing and that you just needed to pray harder and just look on the bright side.
Oh yeah. Have you seen that movie, The Life of Brian?
Yes, I just thought about that song.
Always look on the bright side of life.
Oh, that piqued my puppy's interest. She heard you whistle.
Oh, those dogs, they love the whistle. If you I've noticed this about dogs, Felicia. They
Wait,
love these high
Chandler,
pitched
Chandler,
sounds.
Chandler, focus,
Oh yeah, sorry. So I do this again. See, if I had a free
focus.
if I had a free will, I wouldn't get so distracted.
Wait, where were we?
I don't remember.
Everybody listening, if you expected this to be a productive podcast, I'm so
Sorry about
sorry.
that.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, yeah, okay. We've only been doing this for about 15 minutes. I'm sure we can get back on track. I'm gonna try to shut up for a while and let you finish.
But where was I?
That's a good question. Um, oh yeah, you,
Depression. Oh yeah. Okay. Depression. So the chemical imbalances in your brain, just the way the electricity fires in your brain, your environment, like the way you were raised does so much. It plays into your actions, like what you've seen growing up, how you were expected to act, etc. Like I grew up in a household that really valued education, ironically enough, and where I got to have a mom who could stay home with us and get a lot of attention. And my dad made it was able was we were in a place financially where my dad could make it a priority to be home with us and spend time with us, and we got help on our homework, and consequently I got really good grades. I did really well in school, and that affects the way I see the world and other people and actions and critical thinking and everything like that, whereas not everybody's had that opportunity.
yeah. I mean, it's true that how you grow up is going to have an effect on the way you see the world, and that's the environment component.
Absolutely, huge effect. So um so I started putting that together about how we're not all on the same playing field when it comes to our quote unquote free will. It seems like there are all these causes, the reasons behind how we act. It's not just because we decided to. And so the more I thought about it, the more I came to the conclusion that we cannot be anything other than what we are.
Yeah.
So what that means, because sometimes I've said that and people give me like a really blank look. So I'll expound. That means is I could not possibly have turned out any different than what I am now. I
Yeah.
could not have stayed a Christian. I could not have become a Buddhist. I could not have, liked cats instead of dogs. I could not have liked the color purple instead of blue. I could not still be talking to my parents. There's no other way it could have ended up than the way it has.
Yes. In fact, I mean, Felicia, that's the very essence of determinism. I mean, realizing that the way things are is the way that prior events, the prior causes made them be the way they are. And so, aside from time travel or something crazy like that, the way things are now is the way they have to be.
Yeah, pretty much. That's how that goes. Um, so also the thinking, the more you learn about somebody's background and feel empathy for them, and when you're able to quote put yourself in their shoes, sort of see life from their point of view, and you think, you know what, if I were in their situation and I had grown up in the place that they grew up with, the people they grew up with, I would have done the exact same thing.
Yeah, I've had that same thought many times, Felicia, where there's people that I'll be mad at for the dumb things they do and the things they say to me, but then I realize something. They didn't pull that out of nothing. That's what and especially the more you know about them and you know the kind of parents they have, you know what they grew up in, and I realized, wait a minute, this person from church, from their parents, from school, that's where this is coming from. And so I should not take it as that they thought this mean thing up to say to me when it wasn't their idea at all.
I would still think though, you know what? You're actually a mean person and I don't like you.
Yeah, I mean, and of course that's undeniable, Felicia. I mean, they're still the person they became is not a very nice person, and you stay away from them. But the great thing is that you don't hate them feeling like they are fundamentally fully responsible. And instead, it's kind of like, I mean, and sometimes it can work out, but sometimes there are people I've just had to stay away from because there's just no way to reason with them.
I spend very little time trying these days. I'm already introverted, so it's just not generally worth the effort.
Yeah, and and I came to the same conclusion that their life is too short to constantly be trying to get back friendships with old people from your past when there's a whole world full of billions of other people out there who will be your friends and who will not be that mean to you.
Who needs friends?
Yeah, it's kind of overrated. Religion, friends, sex, it's just all kind of overrated.
But
That's
puppies are not overrated.
definitely not. Puppies are cute,
Puppies
and
are adorable.
and so are ponies.
Teach their own.
Oh, but yeah, but I mean, there is, I guess the main thing is like we realize that we have empathy for these people, realizing that if we had their genetics and their conditioning up to the present moment, we would be doing exactly what they are doing.
There's no other way around it. It could not have been any other way.
Yeah. And the people, they try to come up with ways it could have been another way. Like one of the ways they try to say it is that, well, you have a good heart, you have a good soul that enabled you to choose better than this person. Well, it's not like you choose what soul you get.
Well,
you
the
know
chemicals in my head beg to differ.
exactly, it's really the chemicals in the head, it's not a soul, but people act as if the soul would give them a free will, and it doesn't.
There's just no proof for it.
Yeah, and one of the things is, I mean, people say, well, there's these books written by these people who died and went to heaven and came back and wrote all about it, and they believe it, and they say, oh, that's evidence for a soul. And
Except for where we can do studies and find the chemicals in the brain that make you feel that way.
yeah, there are studies like that, and it's kind of a weird thing because I've tried to become a person who doesn't just instantly believe everything I read. I need to have a little bit more evidence than that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, but I guess what it comes down to is, I mean, first of all, we've already made a case in this podcast explaining how free will is impossible. There's not an extra thing beyond biology and environment that makes you choose differently. But we need to get more into how Christianity falls apart with the lack of human responsibility, I guess.
absolutely. So once I finally came to the decision that free will didn't exist, I kind of just sat with it for a little while and mulled it over because I'd go, okay, free will doesn't exist, so Christianity. What? Christianity exists, so free. No, that doesn't work. And just went back and forth trying to find some way to make it fit.
Yeah.
I needed it to fit. I needed my entire worldview, the structure of it at least, to stay standing. And eventually, I mean, it took a couple more weeks. I say eventually, as if it's a really long time. It really wasn't. But a couple more weeks later, and I decided there really was no way to make it work because there was no free will. Then why did we need a savior to save us from what?
Yeah, I mean, because if our so-called sins are the result of bad training or bad genetics, well then God would just fix those situations, would just fix what's wrong with our brains, with sort of like the electrode in the bowl. God would just fix it. He's so all powerful, but for some reason we're told that he can't violate our free will, which we don't have.
Yeah. And I found that the entire basis for Christianity, the entire foundation, is our ultimate responsibility for
Yeah.
our actions, sin, and most of all, guilt.
Yeah, it does seem that it can't survive without that because that was what it was about. Because it seemed like it was always about, well, you must believe these certain things or go to hell. Or you must do these certain things and don't do the other things and you go to hell. But since you neither choose your beliefs nor your actions, it doesn't matter whether it's your actions or your beliefs that send you to heaven or hell, because either way, you are not the chooser. You are not the one responsible for it. And so the only type of Christianity, the brand that exists without human free will, is like the Calvinist type, which is bizarre because they still try to convert people. And yet their doctrine is that you're going to heaven or hell before you were even born. God already decided that you're going to either heaven or hell, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, maybe he decided you're going to heaven because they converted you. I think is their reasoning. But I think that opens an even greater problem though, which I came to next, which is if I don't have if somebody doesn't have free will, why would you punish them for it?
Yes.
So not only does is there no motivation in Christianity anymore, but also the morality of God comes into question, which is like the second biggest tenet of Christianity ever.
Yeah.
God is love.
Oh.
And I could not see how a God that because who I would want to worship, or then now I don't want to worship anybody at all. I will bow no knees. So the God that I was at the time willing to worship was just and loving. Those were the two things I cared about:
Yeah.
fairness and how you treat other people.
Yeah. I
And that simply could not exist with free will and hell. Or no, rather, the lack of free will and hell.
Yeah, and Felicia, aside from the fact that there's no free will, which of course does obliterate the entire system, but there's another problem with hell, that it serves no purpose. Because punishment, the very idea of punishing someone, it'll only for deterrence to prevent them from repeating the same thing. Does it even make sense in society or otherwise? So what is the purpose of God punishing someone in hell? They're just going to be there and rot in hell forever. So what is the purpose of it? And so you
It's sadism.
yeah, basically it's sadism. It's just it's creating something out of nothing, which supposedly God does, to create the whole universe out of nothing, and then making that thing with the ability to feel pain and then causing immense pain to it. The ultimate sadist. There's just no way other than that I see it. I mean, it's crazy.
My personal opinion is that if the Christian God exists, he's a sociopath. If he doesn't exist, well, he's still a sociopath, but at least he's a fictitious one.
Right. So it seems that there's not much motivation for people to try to be a Christian anymore.
I mean, there's beyond no motivation. There's actually motivation not to be because we have developed this empathy, this compassion that gives me a sense of revulsion when I think about somebody being that cruel.
Yeah. And you know what? For Felicia, for me, that's enough. Realizing I wouldn't want to suffer, so I don't want to make others suffer. The golden rule, basically. And yet it has a biological basis in our empathy in our brains.
And on top of it, it's simply not fair. And I value fairness very, very highly.
Definitely. Um, and we've been going for about 30 minutes, but we're really into it. Did you want to go longer, or did you want to end this episode and maybe
Oh, no,
do?
we can go longer because we haven't even gotten to your side of the story yet.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and we've done longer podcasts before, so
And
yeah,
then we should touch on the religion poisons everything topic.
yes,
Talking specifically about our lives. I've been saying that in my head like multiple times on a daily basis, it seems. Something will occur to me and I just think, religion poisons everything. And
yeah.
then move on. It's been a recurring thing in my head lately. So
Yeah, and that has become a popular phrase ever since it was like the subtitle of Christopher Hitchens' book, God is Not Great, how religion poisons everything. And I think, you know what? I think the guy was right, the more I look at it. And my experience, leaving Christianity was much different than yours. I mean, I still went through the same stages, but they were in a different order, you might say, because I was raised, I was homeschooled most of the time, Christian materials, went to a variety of different Christian churches and denominations, depending on where we lived and stuff like that. But and I took it very seriously. I was that dude who was getting mad at his mother for interrupting him reading the Bible because that's kind of
oh wow.
yeah, that's where I was. I'm going to read 5 chapters of the Bible a day, and as you can guess, I kind of tired out because I didn't want to do that, but it was like, oh, this is something I must do to be the right Christian. So let's just say I was highly religious. I took it very seriously and I was judgmental too. Basically, I was a jerk. Like now that I look back at my former behavior, I was extremely judgmental. Like I don't think I ever told anyone they were going to hell, but back then I believed that people deserved it. I mean, to think of what a monster I was back then when I was filled with that religion, I'm like, oh, I don't like that person. And to think that I was that person, but then a series of events led me out of it, a lot of what I started happening as I started thinking about certain issues, and a lot of people know that the whole abortion issue is kind of one of the main triggers because I started thinking about it and thinking, well, you know what? Where do these babies go when they die? To heaven or hell? And no matter how I sliced it, I could not find an acceptable theory. And I found out that the Christians were preaching different theories. Some say, well, they haven't accepted Jesus or they haven't been baptized. So the unborn babies, they die, they go to hell. And other people are like, oh, well, anybody who dies before the age of accountability goes to heaven. And the problem with the age of accountability is it still requires human free will, which we've already established doesn't exist. But back
Right.
then, I thought my thought was, okay, if people experience some eternal bliss in heaven, and that's good, then we should kill them all before the age of accountability. That was my
Oh.
reasoning. See, that was my reasoning. Well, we should kill them all before they reach the age of accountability so they go to heaven. But then, Felicia, here's what happened. My
Well, I'm
thought
glad something happened. Jeez.
yeah, it was really messed up, Felicia. I was a mess. I will openly admit what a total. There's not a word for what I was back then.
That's
Um,
slightly terrifying.
yeah, but basically, here's what happened: is I started thinking, well, what if they sin in heaven and then get sent to hell? And I'm like, oh, well, if somebody goes to heaven, but then God gets mad at them because they sin and then sends them to hell, then it's only a matter of time before everyone ends up in hell anyway. And so the whole afterlife thing made me realize, dude, everybody's going to hell because there's this angry God. But then I got to thinking, well, what is God so mad about? I mean, after all, why be mad at your own creation for how you created them to be? And then the whole gay marriage thing. Oh, the gay marriage, the homosexuality thing. That's another thing that tore me apart from religion. I thought, well, if God hates fags, if God hates gay people, then why does God create them gay? It, it was weird because I knew that sexuality wasn't a choice. even before I understood that free will didn't exist, I knew that nobody would choose to be gay in a straight culture where being gay was unacceptable. So then I started thinking, oh, well, that's not a choice. So that means if the human's not making the choice, God's making him gay and then punishing them for it. So then I started realizing this God's a lunatic. you know and so you might say these things sort of led me down the path of thinking, wait, something's not right. But then I got to thinking about the alternatives, Felicia. I thought, well, wait a minute, what if there is no afterlife? What if this life is really all we get? Because I started realizing, wait a minute, I've just accepted it on other people's word that heaven or hell even exist. But if this life is all we get, then it's not worth it. What's the reward? What's the point of being a Christian and wasting your one life being an angry religious jerk, hating everybody? And and I wanted to be a more loving person. I wanted to be a more accepting person. And I realized that it was my religious beliefs that I was taught that kept me from being the person that I wanted to be. And so I mean, it's kind of strange how it happened, but then several things happened. I started reading more stuff about the existence of God. I started listening to podcasts and then I just started realizing, wait a minute, everything had to change. How I thought about politics had to change. How I thought about the value of life had to change. And so I sort of became a philosopher. I started thinking about these things. And so the existence of God, the soul, free will. Um, and then one of the transitions that happened is I realized that religion is the biggest promoter of speciesism. The idea that only human life matters and that it's completely okay to torture all these other animals. But Felicia, when I look at cats and dogs and horses and the hamster I used to have and all sorts of these other animals, I see them, they see me, they hear me, they react, they feel pain, they run away from pain. There is no way that their behavior is any different than mine. And I realized, had I been born as one of them, I would be experiencing the suffering they're experiencing, whether that's factory farms or just general mistreatment, and the fact that people just view them as a piece of meat. Their entire life is just to be, filled with hormones and fed a bunch of dumb stuff, all to just be killed and then eaten and ruining the human's health who eat them because it's not that healthy. So then I turned into a vegetarian and eventually vegan. And so I turned into some sort of weird hybrid between an atheist and a Jain.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it sounds weird to you hearing all this, but that's sort of what happened to me. And then I started turning into this person preaching anti-violence and being against the death penalty, being anti-war, and watching My Little Pony. And it just turned into I was a mess before, Felicia. But what I've told you a few minutes ago, you could tell I was a real mess back then. I'm still a mess, but I'm a lot nicer of a mess now. but I no longer blame myself for being the mess I am at the time because I know I didn't choose it.
Yeah. So at which point did you actually leave Christianity though?
I would have, let's see, now I'm 28 years old now. When I was about 25, I started having serious doubts and I quit going to church. Um, But then around the next year, like the summer of, I guess was it 2012 or 2013, I've been listening to many podcasts and I started realizing that, the theory of evolution started making more sense. And I started realizing that the universe and the world didn't need a creator. And I realized, well, I'm an atheist. And for a while, I guess before that, I was sort of a deist. I figured, well, yeah, there's a God who created the world, and then he abandoned it, and so there's no practical difference. But I think around the time I was 25 years old, I quit calling myself a Christian or something like that because I thought, hey, I don't believe in, at least the Christian God. I don't believe in heaven and hell that much. I don't really believe that Jesus was a real person. I don't believe people resurrect from the dead. And so I don't believe any Christian belief. So I quit calling myself that. And I started studying Hinduism, found out that didn't make any sense. And I was a deist for a while, and I was sort of a big fan of Albert Einstein. But finally, I realized, you know what? This doesn't benefit my life. Believing in a God doesn't even benefit my life. Plus, I have no evidence. And I guess I started to realize it just turned into this thing where I'm like, hey, I don't believe anything. Everything I know is wrong. And so then I just wanted to learn everything all anew, and everything that I believe now is it has to be based on something I've seen or heard or smelled or felt. My physical senses in this physical body is all that I can actually know. And so the most key thing that distinguishes me now is that, I'm not a Christian and I'm not a God believer. And I don't believe that there's a life in some other place waiting for me after I die. And so I guess that explains why I feel so sad when people die, because it's not, oh well, they're going to a better place. Now it's like they're dead. I'll never see them again. And you know what? For people I care about, that hurts.
I don't think it. Okay. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but what that last bit sounds like,
Hmm.
it sounds like Christians aren't sad when people die.
Well, what's interesting about that, Felicia, is that many of them are sad, and yet what they do is then they turn around and like, oh well, I'll see him in heaven, and that's at least the people I've been around. It's sort of like I always found there to be a cognitive dissonance. It's like, well, they're sad, but at the same time, they're acting like they're not sad. And because if you, to me, I guess I looked at it as if I really believed that it was not the end, that they were in a better place, then I wouldn't feel so sad.
I don't know. I honestly don't know if that's true. Because, like, if I have a really, really close friend, let's play the let's pretend game on that
Y-
one.
yeah, sure.
Um, if I have a really, really close friend and they get a fantastic job offer across the country or in another country, I'm going to be sad that they're not going to be with me anymore, even though I know they're going to be doing something that's better for them, that's going to benefit them. So I can be like, I can be happy for them, but be sad for myself.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Like, yeah, because when somebody moves far away, you never see them or don't have any contact.
Right.
Well, I guess that might be how they're looking at it because they can't talk to that person right then. So that makes sense. So they're
Sad
still,
for themselves, happy for the person who's in heaven.
yeah, I guess that makes sense. But that does lead to another question I asked back in my questioning phase. And I'm like, is there no phone service or internet in heaven? Because if so, I'm not that interested. You know? Because why can't they communicate with them? You have to
Because
wonder.
all the scientists are in hell, Chandler.
Oh, that's right. We forgot all the scientists are in hell, and so they haven't been able to build, an extremely long distance phone internet system.
I think it's coming soon.
Yeah, sure. I would sure hope so, because I mean, now it's not like I make a regular practice of talking to dead people, but I've been in churches where people have tried that, and they're trying to talk with the dead people, and they think
Oh, really?
they think the dead are talking to them. I was in this one church that was sort of a borderline between Presbyterian and Catholic, and Eastern Orthodox sort of, and they were lighting candles for people and writing stuff on papers and then burning the papers and doing strange rituals and thinking that they were talking to ghosts and so it kind of got spooky and sort of like a Christmas Carol type of spooky, you know.
I think there's medication for that.
Yeah, I would hope so. But that's the kind of spookiness that it got into. But that wasn't the worst. The worst was when I was in a Pentecostal church. Yeah, the whole speaking in tongues and all sorts. Yeah, some pretty strange experiences there. But I now see that a lot of what happened there could be explained through music and the rhythm and the emotional high. There's something chemical going on, and these people really believe that they're experiencing the presence of God.
And
But
also possibly schizotypal personalities.
yeah, and you know what I think is I think that all these people, birds of a feather flock together. And these people all have these experiences and they all have a certain type of disorder. And so they enjoy these experiences together. But for me, I thought, well, people, the way they're acting scares me. It became sort of an unpleasant feeling being around them.
Yeah, on the outside looking in, it changes everything.
Yeah. And
Like everything about the church seems really creepy to me now.
yeah, and you know what's strange, Felicia? When I was in it, it didn't seem as creepy as it does, 3 years later.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. No, it definitely freaks me out now just because like wow, there's medication for this. You guys are really scaring me. Like
Yeah.
I'm really concerned about your mental health on some parts of it, you know. And also I recognize today I went to Barnes and Noble today to get a Catholic Bible because I've never read the Apocrypha. All I've read Judith and that's it. And so I wanted to just read, like the whole thing straight through and see their translation of it. And the one we have at our apartment now is sort of a family heirloom from my fiance's family, and so he won't let me take notes in it.
Oh.
And I cannot read things I need to remember and not take notes. So I went to the bookstore to get one for myself that I can mark up, and I was passing by, the Christian literature section, and I just feel this like uneasiness. I'm like, ugh. And then I go past all these devotional Bibles, like, no, thank you. Study Bibles, couples devotional, no, thank you. And then I pass by the women's devotionals.
Oh no.
And I stop and I look at it for a second and I get really frustrated because I'm thinking, look, I don't like what you have to say to me as a person, and I sure as hell am not gonna listen to anything that you have to say to me as a woman.
Oh, I know. Felicia, I've read some women's devotionals and stuff. My mom's had a bunch, and I've seen them, so I know what you're talking about, man. It's
Uh, I'm thinking like you as a religion have nothing to say to me about being a woman. I don't want to hear anything. You
it's
don't know what you have no right to be speaking to me.
and
Is
because especially since the religion is run entirely by men, basically, the doctrines, the writings were all done by men, and
and
they don't.
no matter how hard the New Testament tries to make up for it, it does not undo the harm of the Old Testament.
Yeah, what really blew it for me was that they had to sacrifice turtle doves, I think it was, every time a woman menstruated. That's what kind of blew it for me, and I realized, you know what, this book is anti-woman. There's something
Yay,
wrong.
more blood!
Yeah, there's something wrong with that. And
See, for me, I'm pretty sure it was Lot's daughters.
yeah, that story too.
Here, take them. Like, excuse me?
I'm like,
Excuse me? Can
yeah,
we just, how about nobody gets raped? Can we just do that? How about
yeah,
nobody?
yeah. That sounds better to me. Nobody gets raped. That sounds a lot better, Felicia.
Yeah. And it's just, and then, my fiance and I have been talking recently about, women's rights in ancient history. and all of like the how so many of the Native American tribes were matriarchal, and the rights that I think was it might have been Babylon, Egypt, no, Greece. We were talking about Greece and Rome and how women could be in the legislatures and that sort of thing. And in Greece, women could, go to war. At least I haven't double checked all this. That's my next step. But this is information that I am considering right now. And how this was pre-Christianity. And I'm like, man, Christianity came through and they set us back so far.
Yeah, and my mom would agree with that because she has mentioned that it's, in Christianity and churches where women are treated the worst. And I've seen that because it seems like, in everyday secular society, there seems to be a little bit less sexism, less racism, less, anti-gayism or whatever. It just seems that
Right.
as a culture, people have evolved, but not religion. It hasn't evolved much.
It's slowly.
Yeah.
It seems like our morality goes first and then religion follows after,
It does seem
several
like that.
decades behind.
Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting. And one observation that I noticed in what I've read and what I've researched about some of these things, I found out that, after abortion was legalized in the U.S., well, then all of a sudden, the churches started conforming to that and becoming pro-choice. That would become part of their doctrine, a part of their church's stance, because otherwise that means that their church is sort of in opposition to the Supreme Court ruling, and so and churches want to be in good terms with the government, maintain their tax exemption status and all that. So basically, to me, it looked like cowardice. It just looked like, well, you're just conforming to whatever's the popular thing, so you can keep your fancy church and your religion and your tax exemption. So I guess my criticism of the financial handlings of the churches is another thing that kind of pushed me out of that because I saw them as greedy cheats and liars, basically.
Well, let's go back to abortion for a second. I have three things. First, I think I would be remiss if I did not go ahead and state that I currently have no stance on abortion. I am not pro life. I am not pro choice. I have no stance because I'm still in the process of weighing the evidence. And because I honestly don't have time to care about absolutely everything. And there are a lot of things on my list.
Yeah. And Felicia, and that's actually pretty cool because a lot of people they don't weigh the evidence. They don't consider these things carefully. And they're just like, the most of the people that I know, Felicia, who are, like, they grew up Catholic, and so they're pro-life because their parents and their church taught them to be pro-life. And I don't think that's a good reason to be pro-life, honestly. And there's some people who are pro-choice because that's the way their friends are, that's the way their family politically has been, and so they just copy it. And I don't think people should just be copying things unquestioningly because that's sort of what religion is to me anyway. So I actually think it's very admirable, I might say, for you to say that, and to consider the issue. And like you said, Felicia, you can't be concerned about everything. And I didn't mean to get onto this topic that much. It's just that it comes up because that was such a big part of my deconversion from Christianity,
Yeah.
because I thought, well, God is definitely, if God exists, God is definitely in favor of abortion. In fact, because he could stop it, being all powerful and all being the first cause and all that. And so, since I do view it as a sad thing, apart from the whole rights thing, which I don't even want to get into it, but just, yeah, it is a baby, it is killing, but God's fine with killing, and so God's not pro-life. I am. So God and I don't get along too well.
Well, I can see where you would logically make that assumption, but I don't think that that is the only way to think about God, because a lot of people come to the exact opposite conclusion. And it comes into play with free will and God staying out of things and such and things, and whether or not they
Yeah.
think they go to heaven. And it's I think you might be oversimplifying it.
Well,
So my first thing was announcing that I have no stance on abortion. And part of that is that I'm evaluating it on two fronts. One is whether or not I believe it's moral, and the other whether or not I believe it should be legal.
yeah,
Because then the question is, I mean, there are a bunch of things that I think are immoral. You know, lying, to cheating on your significant other. That's that sort of thing. Believe teaching your kid about hell. There are a lot of things that I find to be immoral, but I don't think they should be illegal, because I think people because you have to give people the option to be stupid, unfortunately.
yeah, well, Felicia, I agree. There's a huge difference there. And, this might surprise some of the people if they listen to this at all, but as far as the legality, I'm actually not so sure that laws are effective at anything. You know what I'm saying? When new laws are put in place, all it does is sets up a system of punishing people who break that law. But that's not where my focus has ever been. My focus really hasn't been in the law. I guess I've always just been considering it from the moral side. And, so it's the whole legality thing. That's still sort of open. It's just that I don't think that, yeah, I think they are separate, the legal and the moral thing. You wouldn't necessarily ban legally everything that you consider immoral. So I can agree with that reasoning, and I think that that's perfectly valid and doesn't contradict anything.
Yeah, and that makes it so difficult, because then I also have to evaluate the morality of deciding something, whether something is legal based on its morality. It,
Yeah,
it gets extremely complicated, so I'm working on it slowly.
yeah, and one of the things that I want to make clear to everybody is that I'm not you know, it's the Free Will Science and Religion podcast. We understand people aren't to blame for what they do, and so I used to be a really hateful pro-lifer. I will warn you, before I came to understand that free will is an illusion, and I understood that people don't have that fundamental responsibility. Well, I blamed them. I blamed them for having sex, and like it's like these evil people who have sex and then kill babies. Like, that before, if you don't understand that free will is an illusion and you are holding people fundamentally accountable to blame, well, it turns you into a jerk. And that was why I was a jerk for so many years. A lot of it. First, I became a little bit better after leaving Christianity, but I've benefited so much since I understood that people aren't to blame. And so I can't blame them, which is why I'm able to now have more peaceful discussions about any topic where I agree or disagree with people. So yeah, I mean, Felicia, I just wanted to say, I really appreciate that, you took the time to do this podcast with me and all that. I mean, we talked about so much of our stories of coming out of Christianity, and I'm sure there's more that could be talked about. I mean, you're probably talked out for today.
And I am up to talk about how religion poisons everything. But you've
Yes.
also, I think you're also more of an introvert.
Yes, I would say definitely. I mean, I don't have offline friends. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So I don't know if you're up to going into something else, considering we've been on an hour, but I am up to it if you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you want to just continue talking where we are now, or did you want to start a new episode, or?
Why don't yeah, let's go ahead and start a new episode. For one, for the sake of the length. For two, it'll give us a reset button on being on topic.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So I'm just gonna kind of do the outro, the exit. Okay. You've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs and Felicia Hogan, and we've talked about a variety of topics for a long time, but it's time to end this because it's getting kind of long. We'll see you in the future. Bye.